everyone. Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 159 of House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, also known, of course, as the mighty OGGO. Before we start, everyone, just a gentle reminder, to keep your headphones away from the microphones at all time. Also, do not touch your microphone when the red light is on. Colleagues, just at the end, I need about 3 minutes of your time. We're just going to go into, in camera, I just want to discuss one quick item with everyone to get feedback for as we proceed. But we welcome Mr. Hartle to us. You have a 5-minute opening statement. The floor is yours, Mr. Hartle. And then we'll go for 1 hour, suspend, and then we'll bring in the procurement ombudsman. Mr. Hartle, welcome. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. The procurement strategy for Indigenous business has no governing act. It is not a program, rather it is a strategy whereby government contracts for goods and services destined for Indigenous populations are awarded to Indigenous businesses. Government policy mandated that any set-aside contract for an Indigenous business whose value was $2 million or greater was to have a pre-award audit. Contracts less than that amount could be randomly audited at the discretion of the department. Large contracts, $2 million or greater, contain a clause that allows the government to perform a post-award audit. This audit is primarily to ensure the business is compliant with the criterion of Indigenous content. The criterion states that the Indigenous business and/or Indigenous subcontractors must perform at least 33% of the work that is required to fulfill the contract. Today, I appear before the committee to answer questions on a particularly egregious file. Pettibon 35 Nursing Incorporated and Canadian Healthcare Agency Limited in joint venture, hereafter referred to as the joint venture. The joint venture was awarded an 8-year, $160 million set-aside contract to deliver nursing direct services to remote Indigenous communities. My audit determined that the joint venture was a shell for the non-Indigenous Canadian Healthcare Agency. This business took advantage of the naivety of the owner of Pettibon 35 Nursing to win and execute a large set-aside contract. In my audit, I concluded the joint venture did not exist for any other function except to enable CHCA to win and execute the PSIB mandatory set-aside contract. I will also answer your questions on contractual joint ventures as to why they are problematic. Finally, I would like to discuss with the committee mandatory audits. When the policy was introduced, the mandatory audits were to be performed by Canada Auditing and Consulting. This branch of the government provided the required third-party independent auditors. When it was disbanded, the services were contracted out. In November 2016, Altus Professional Services was under contract to provide the department with third-party independent auditors for PSIP. I contracted my services to Altus. The Altus contract ended in 2021. ISC decided that the new contract should be a set-aside as required when serving the Indigenous community. Round Point Consulting is an Akwesasne business registered in the IBD. Mr. Round Point asked me to join him in submitting a bid proposal for auditing service in response to solicitation number 10002269949. Round Point Consulting was awarded a 2-year set-aside contract. The contract had a typical renewal clause. This clause stated that the government, at its pleasure, could extend the existing contract 3 times for 1 year each time. In July 2023, ISC decided to ignore the mandatory auditing requirements and terminated Round Point's consulting contract. The business was denied any recovery costs incurred to deliver the services required. Although it is arbitrary and violates the government policy, unfortunately, Round Point did not have the resources to pursue legal recourse. But in my opinion, Round Point Consulting would have been successful had it sought judicial review. I asked the committee to address two critical issues. One, the absence of external audits will mean there's a lack of oversight to detect and deter public corruption. Two, the travesty in terminating a set-aside contract for an Akwesasne business. Round Point Consulting is a small, dynamic business recognized by its community as a model in the era of First Nations self-government. Mr. Round Point has a growing family. He is active and a valuable member of the Mohawks of Akwesasne. Mr. Round Point had plans to hire and train Indigenous auditors while I was available to mentor these young people.
Mr. Hardall, sorry, I have to ask you to wrap up. We're at our 5-minute mark. If you could just wrap up briefly.
Oh, well, I do have some comments about yesterday's Jessica Sultan
I'm afraid
testimony.
in order, we only have you for an hour, so in
Okay,
order to get
no,
through all our
that's fine.
rounds, I'll have to cut you off here. But anything you have in writing there, you can send to the clerk, and he will have it translated and distributed to the whole committee.
I did do that.
Perfect. Great. We're going to, I'm going to have to cut you off there, I'm afraid. So we're going to go right to our first intervention, but I'm sure you can answer or get out some of the information you're trying to right now. We'll start with Mr. Genuis for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hardall, for your testimony, and more importantly, thank you for your courage in coming forward and shedding light on these issues. I know there are a lot of people who see problems in government or things that shouldn't be happening, but most of them don't proactively share the concerns that they have. So thank you for doing that. You've identified the fact that this joint venture involving Canadian Healthcare Agency only existed to take advantage of the Indigenous procurement rules. It wasn't a sort of organically emergent Indigenous company. It was created for the purpose of taking advantage of the rules that exist and providing maximal, in fact, complete advantage to non-Indigenous owners of Canadian Healthcare Agency. Is that correct?
That's correct. The owner of CHCA, Miss Humana, promised the Indigenous company, a lady named Pearl Chilton, that she would make lots of money, but then never had her do nothing. Done the proposal herself and made up employees for Miss Chilton's company, and made sure that she ran everything. Didn't discuss any of the business of the joint venture at all with Miss Chilton, and Miss Chilton was left with a large GST tax bill that was incurred because of the way that they were submitted to the Canada Revenue Agency.
So it sounds like this relationship was not only fraudulent vis-a-vis the government, but it was exploitive vis-a-vis the person who was supposed to be the Indigenous partner.
That's correct.
Okay. I think that's important. I want to really zero in, though, on the response of the government when you brought these issues forward. We would hope maybe that as soon as someone would bring these issues to light, there would be a real sounding of the alarm internally and a desire to remedy the situation.
The players on the government side was FNEB, who was a branch, which was a branch of Health Canada at that time, PSPC, and well, it was actually INAC at that time. So, and I was within the INAC stream there. And so I wrote my report, which I distributed prior to this meeting, and then we held several meetings where we had not only those players, but we also had a representative from the Department of Justice who was a lawyer serving INAC at that time, and I presented the evidence, which was substantial to indicate there was fraud, and my recommendation was that that it be given to the RCMP to investigate, but they didn't want any trouble, so they didn't do it.
If you can tell us more about that a little bit, you recommended that this be referred to the RCMP because you thought criminal activity, in fact, was involved, and they didn't want any trouble.
Yeah, I thought it was fraud because you can't invent employees for a company and submit that in your bid proposal to win the contract, because the number of employees in the Indigenous company went towards points to win the contract. So it was to me, that's definitely fraud, you know, and all the documentation was there to prove that, you know, and besides additional.
But you also said something about motivation, them not wanting any trouble. So what kinds of comments did they make in terms of explaining why they didn't refer this to the RCMP?
I can't remember the exact comments, but because a large meeting, you know, you have your input, but you don't necessarily. And I was only there as an external auditor presenting facts to.
But there were lots of people there.
Oh,
right?
yeah, there was.
Okay.
As I said, there was representatives, you know, from PSPC, FNIB, and INAC.
Right. Okay.
And the DOG lawyer was there also.
Right. So fast forward today, this company is still getting government contracts. They've been taken off the Indigenous business list, but they are still eligible for getting government contracts. And the only people fired following this affair were Round Point Consulting. Maybe take us forward to the fact that they're still getting contracts, but Round Point Consulting has been fired by the government.
Well, in fact, the INAC invented a program so that they could give contracts to CHCA. So that's how they were able to get contracts. And
what do you mean they invented a program?
I'm sorry, designed.
But for the purposes of giving contracts to this company.
To this entity.
So what's the relationship between this company and the government of Canada?
I have no idea.
Okay. If you could just tell us the situation about Round Point getting their contract pulled. Meantime.
Oh yes. Well,
I'm sorry to Mr. Hartle. Mr. Hartle, I'm afraid I have to interrupt. It is our time, but perhaps we can get to it in the next round with Mr. Genuis, or he can provide that to us in writing. We'll go over to Mrs. Atwin, please, now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hartle, for being with us today. Have you ever been a permanent or part-time employee of Indigenous Services Canada?
No, I have not.
So the recent Globe and Mail article mentions that you worked under contract with the government. Yes. But why does your LinkedIn profile indicate that you've been employed at Indigenous Services since 2016, with no mention of Round Point Consulting?
Oh, no, I think I addressed that in my remarks, which you will get a copy of. But definitely, in fact, the thing is, I started in November 2016 as a subcontractor to Altus Professional Services, who held the contract to supply independent third-party auditors for the program or for the strategy.
Okay.
And then Altus's contract ended in March 31st, 2021, and then Round Point put its bid in that fall and won the contract. And I started again in the 1st of April 2022.
Okay.
But as an employee of Round Point Consulting.
Okay, thank you. I've just got such a short period of time here. Did you have any conflict of interest screens in place while you were a contractor for Indigenous Services Canada?
What kind of conflict of interest?
So are you aware of any conflict of interest screens or policies in place for employees at Indigenous Services Canada while you were a contractor for them? Was there a conversation about conflict of interest?
I would not be covered by conflict of interest if I'm a subcontractor.
Okay. And so can you then, I think you mentioned this, but can you confirm if you have been an employee of Round Point Consulting?
Yep.
Okay. And has Round Point Consulting ever been listed on the Indigenous Business Directory?
Yes, Round Point Consulting.
Do you know when that occurred?
Maybe 2020, 2021. They've been a member of the IBD for quite some time.
So would that have been during the time that you were contracted to perform eligibility audits?
I beg your pardon?
Would that have been during the time frame that you were contracted to perform the eligibility audits?
Yes.
Do you believe that an auditor contracted to review applications for the Indigenous Business Directory is well placed to determine if their own business should be listed?
Well, in 2020 and 2021, we did not audit, we didn't have anything to do with the IBD.
Okay.
So the IBD was, I forget the exact date, but it was formerly run by Industry Canada. So Industry Canada would register the businesses, but then Industry Canada decided that they no longer wanted to do that function. They said it was too expensive. So then IBD decided to design their own business directory, you know. So in that period of time,
The Indigenous Business Directory decided to design its own business directory? Is that what you just
well,
said?
yeah, because the business directory before was being run by Industry Canada, and no longer wanted to do it, so it give it back to ISC to design its own.
So ISC, okay. Okay. While you were doing this work, how many audits did you complete, roughly?
Oh, maybe 100 a year.
100 a year, okay. Do you happen to know what the non-compliance rate would be? And could you share that with us?
Fairly low. I don't think it would exceed. It definitely wouldn't exceed 10%. May even be lower than that. You know.
Okay. And I'll just jump now quickly to the Canadian Healthcare Agency piece as well. So when were you made aware of concerns around CHCA?
Well, I'd done the audit, you know. So
And what was the
I
time?
was tasked with doing the audit, the post-award audit on them.
Do you know the date, though, just so I can...
2017.
Okay. And when did you report this alleged issue to PSPC?
Yeah, it was probably a month or two. We had difficulty with the company because they wouldn't supply the information. They kept asking for deferrals to have the audit completed. So I don't have the exact date, and I was looking for it. I don't have the date on my report either. So, but it was sometime during 2017.
Okay. And as an auditor, what do you look for when verifying Indigenous identity? Is that something that you look into?
Oh, okay. I don't know if you got a copy of, and I'll just briefly go over that if you give me time to do this. But
Actually, I've only got about 45 seconds, so maybe I'll just end with this one. So can I just ask?
There are a whole list of things that we look at.
Sure.
Okay, and
if you've provided that to us, that's fantastic. I'll look
and
into
I
that.
can
But I've just got
provide
about
that to
30
you.
seconds, Mr. Hartle. So what is your response to the minister's announcement yesterday that she's pursuing an external audit of the Indigenous Business Directory?
well, that was being done, you know, and she fired the person doing it. So it seems to be a rather hypocritical response to a problem that they created themselves.
Okay. Thank you. That's all for
Thanks,
me, Mr.
Mrs.
Chair.
Atwin. Mrs. Vignola, welcome back.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Hartle, for being with us today. Could you please put in your earpiece?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, or can you hear the interpretation clearly? There's a volume button on the machine in front of you, the little console in front of you. Thank you. The clerk will help.
We'll start at the beginning.
English channel. This is the interpretation English channel for volume purposes. English channel interpretation.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. You talked earlier about the letter of December 5th and the fact that you found a Canadian Healthcare Agency was, 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 doing fraudulent activity. Is that what you were saying? That it was that company that was the problem?
Yes, that company was the problem.
OK. Et quelle preuve démontre une situation?
What evidence do you have of this fraud? You talked earlier about the other company that had employees that were not part of that company, that there was a GST amount because of this declaration, even though these employees were not part of that company, they had never seen the money. Are there other details that you could give the committee quickly on that topic?
Well, the evidence is substantial, and it's in my report. All the evidence. I don't have the evidence, but I have the evidence catalog, and so if you look at my audit report, and on the page on exhibits, okay. So I had Appendix A, A1, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. Each with substantial documents in them.
Merci beaucoup. Ce rapport-là a été soumis au comité.
Thank you very much. And that report, you submitted it to committee. That's to the committee. That's right?
That's right.
Parfait.
Perfect. Now, in the distribution of contract procedure, are there any gaps that would open the doors to this kind of fraudulent situation, the one kind that you've raised today?
Well, if you follow the procedure, there would be no gaps. Okay, so I think there was also a copy of the procedures in the document package. So we also had standards. So each audit that was performed had to follow these standards, and I think I give you in the package a copy of the standards that we used for the audit. So.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. So everything is in the document you submitted to us. Perfect. Now, you're telling us that if the procedures are followed, then there should not be any problems. There should be no gaps. However, it looks like there are. In that case, should we be monitoring what's happening during the contract itself instead of waiting for an audit at the end?
No, the process is two-stage. Okay, you in the large contracts you have to have a pre-award audit completed in order to be awarded the audit or the contract, and then on the large contracts there's always a post-award audit, and if you follow the procedures for the post-award audits, you will uncover when the criterion of indigenous content is not being met. But as you can see, if you don't actually perform the audit, you won't know whether or not they had adhered to the criterion of indigenous content. So there's no real gaps. You know, the audits were in place to ensure that the program was being used properly.
OK. Mais les audits sont faits.
But these audits are conducted afterwards. They're post-award audits. And my question was really during the duration of the contract to make sure the Indigenous business is really getting what it is owed. Should there be audits conducted during the period of the contract, also not just before or after, but throughout the process?
The post-award audit is not really post-award. It's conducted when there's about 70% of the work completed. You have to be able to complete some of the work to see if they're actually following what they said they were going to follow. You can't presume that a company will or will not meet the criterion before the actual contract is completed.
Le simple fait de.
Now, the simple fact of removing a business from the directory, is it enough of a consequence for a business that did not respect the Indigenous procurement process or that pretended to be an Indigenous company when it is not? Is it enough to simply remove them from the directory?
I think that this was a discussion. I mean, it was brought to the department's attention, and also to the PSPC. That this was going on. And the PSPC defaulted the contract, but took no other action on the fraud part of it. They just elected. So that's a government initiative that you have to address with Procurement Canada, and because ISC doesn't have anything to do with the contract other than to recommend that the company meets the criteria for an Indigenous business.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Blaney, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hartle, for being here with us today. I appreciated your testimony, and I also read the article very carefully this morning. In your testimony, I think you said, and I just want to clarify this, that there is no governing act around this component, and we've definitely heard that from other sources as well. So I guess I just want a little bit of clarity. You said during your interview that the auditors could not contact the businesses but had to give questions to the government, and there was a whole, sounds quite a complex process. I'm just wondering, is there any connection between that process and the fact that there is no governing act?
No, there's no governing act, but there is a cabinet issued policy that was mandated to be followed, and they have published guidelines on that policy. So between the various audits that I did and whenever Miss Sultan became in charge of the program, the previous senior program managers knew the program inside out, and they were empathetic to the Indigenous business, and they did a very good job, and they respected what was written in the contract is the external auditor would do an independent audit and give them the results of the audit. When Ms. Sultan took over, she decided that she was going to dictate not only the process, but also she changed the policy unilaterally, I guess, because nobody's taken possession of the fact that the policy was changed and then no longer did what they were supposed to do under the policy guidelines.
So what added complexity was there because you had such a long process to go through since you couldn't talk to the business directly? You were
dealing with I don't like to use the word junior staff because it's condescending, but you were dealing with people that didn't have any knowledge of the program, didn't have any knowledge in dealing with outside clients, and didn't know what questions to ask, didn't know what documents to ask for. So it was like a constant hand-holding. That you instead of being able to smoothly carry out the audits as they had been done previously, we also had a productivity standard that we had to meet, which stated that if there was no other cause, then you had to deliver the report within 10 working days. So that the process worked very smoothly, and this got disrupted because she insisted that the junior staff do all this work, and the junior staff they were very nice people and tried to help them as much as they could, but because they didn't understand the program, they didn't know what to ask or how to ask it, or you're not supposed to go fishing for anything. You, as an auditor, you're supposed to know what documents are available for you to examine. You don't ask a company to send every document they have. It's a very targeted experience. And they didn't comprehend that because they weren't auditors.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So you talked about the issue of round point consulting, and I thought it was very interesting. And I've heard this from Indigenous communities as well. Is if they fight the fight and they have the money to hire the lawyers, they're absolutely going to win. But they often don't have the resources to hire the lawyer. So I'm just wondering if I get a little clarity. So is there no other venue that they can go to besides a judicial process? Is there any other mechanism for this kind of business to gather clarity, to get information, and to have a little bit of advocacy? Or is the judicial pathway the only pathway?
Well, because you're dealing with a contract, a written contract, and you decide that you're going to terminate the contract, for convenience. Now, the contract does state you can do it for convenience, but so judicial review is the only legitimate path to pursue, which means that you're showing that the government did wrong, and I'm positive that Round Point would have won its case.
And okay, I'm going to come back to that later. So I'm interested. You talked about mandatory audits being a part of the contract, and that you saw ISK not follow through with those mandatory steps. Are you specifically talking about one business, or is it a broader scope that you're reflecting on?
No, after July 2023, they had no capability to carry out any audits. So all of the mandated audits that are in the guidelines were being circumvented because they had no external auditors. Like if you wish, you can read the guidelines. So, it states clearly that you must have an external auditor. When the program was first started, the government already had a branch that would supply the external auditors, so they used them. That's Canada Auditing and Consulting, but then the government disbanded that branch, so they had to find private sector external auditors.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Before we start our second round, Mr. Hartle, you've referred to some reports. I think perhaps you sent them to a different committee, but we haven't. You have to send them to each committee individually. So if you could forward those to our clerk, we'll follow up with you after this for the proper email. We'll now go to Mrs.
We have them all here.
You can pass them over to the clerk when you're done today.
Okay.
We'll go to Mrs. Block for 5, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to our committee, Mr. Hartle. In follow-up to Ms. Atwin's questions, you mentioned that there was a whole list or criterion that was used in order to verify the indigeneity of a business. Would you be willing to share that list with committee in writing?
Yeah, I do have that here. I was just looking it up. Besides the I have that document, and we also would have read all the case law, notably Powley and Daniels, and we also were guided by Section 35 of the Constitution.
Thank you very much, and I would just ask that if you have that document, if you could submit it to the committee in writing, that would save you and I both a bit of time here.
Oh, yes,
Okay.
I will do that. In fact, I have it right here.
Thank you. Great. So I believe you may have answered this question as well. Who did you raise your concerns about PSIB and the ongoing abuses with?
Well, when I first started, the senior program manager was a lady named Melanie Reed, and Melanie is Indigenous, and she was concerned that the program ran smoothly. So she would hold meetings and take suggestions as to what could be done, including our audit manual, and I wrote some stuff on joint ventures, contractual joint ventures, with some recommendations.
If I may, what was her title?
At that time, she was senior program manager.
Okay, thank you.
Presently, she's a director in ISC.
Okay, thank you. In the Globe and Mail story, Minister Hadju is quoted as saying, and I quote, "I was just made aware of these deeply troubling allegations, and I am extremely concerned." Yet the allegations around this nursing company, CHAC, were published already in October in the Globe and Mail, and further issues with the PSIB have been brought to light over the inability to verify the indigeneity of businesses. However, the minister appears to have been unaware of these issues until this past Sunday, according to her statement. Does this seem realistic to you that the minister was completely blind to this massive aspect of her portfolio?
Not really.
Not really? I think my next question would be, do you believe that these types of concerns would have ever made their way to the offices of at least the deputy minister, if not the minister?
Well, I was speaking about what went on in 2017, 18, and 19. Any problems with the program, the senior program manager would have discussed it with the ADM. She had a path to discuss it with the ADM. And once you discuss it with the ADM, the minister is always notified as to that there is a problem. I mean, that's standard practice.
Thank you very much. I guess my final question for you, if I have enough time left, would be that yesterday in your testimony to the INAN committee, you were asked a question about who made the decision to fire Round Point. And it would have appeared that when Ms. Sultan was trying to answer the question, the minister intervened. Can you confirm for us who it was that made the decision to fire Round Point? Do you in fact know?
Well, okay, she said, Ms. Sultan said, that it was a joint decision with the contract authority. Well, I just a minute, I get my notes here because I watched that and I was going to address it, but I ran out of time. This is totally false, okay? The contract authority, a lady named Karen Metzer, is designated senior procurement officer. And her authority only pertains to administrative matters, such as writing the contract, ensuring the contractor adheres to the security provisions, and processing the invoices for work completed. That's all her authority. So any decision on policy matters rests solely with the Director General. So she made the decision. And
Thanks, Mr. Hartle. That's our time. We have a strict schedule we got to keep to. Mr. Kuzmierczuk, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hartle, for your appearance here at committee here today. So wanted to ask you a few questions. As of November of 2024, there are 2,945 businesses listed on the Indigenous Business Directory. Of those 3,000, let's say, businesses, 111 are Indigenous businesses are joint ventures, which represents about 3% of the total. And in 2022, when ISC did a review of the Indigenous Business Directory, they delisted or removed 1,100 businesses. So about 25% of the total were removed. Can you comment on this step that was taken? Any thoughts on that?
I have a couple of notes on businesses being removed from the ID. From 2017,
just
when
really quickly, sir.
Yeah, so each year there was business dropped and added. So the number always fell somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 businesses each year. New ones being added, some of them being dropped, and it was explained that they would be dropped for various reasons. Like the business wouldn't respond, maybe went out of business.
But 1,000 had been removed from the last review. Is that significant, that number, in your opinion?
No. No, because you know, there was years that easily get 500, you know, and so going to 1,000 is not to me significant. And don't forget that there was a spike when the 5% target was introduced. Okay, so the government actively tried to get businesses to register in the IBD in order to meet the 5% target. And then they found that they were a little bit over exuberant and that some of these people shouldn't have been included, so they took them out. So
I appreciate it. Well, thank you, Mr. Hartle. And I just for the interest of time, I do have another question for you. Are you familiar with the new Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance, or OSIC, that was established by this government? It actually expands what is the grounds for which a business can be made ineligible or suspended. It broadens the number of violations that can be brought forward and the penalties that can be doled out. Are you aware of the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance that was introduced?
Yes, I'm aware the office was introduced, but I didn't look at the details. It was on my to-do list.
Now, this office was not around when you were doing audits, as I understand it, and so the tools that we've introduced to strengthen integrity and compliance, and also the penalties that can be provided, was not available when you were doing your audits. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
That's correct. Oh, okay.
And I think that was the major criticism that was there from the previous Harper government, was that the integrity regime only had at that point a nuclear button. It could only react only if a company was charged or convicted of a crime, for example. Then the integrity regime kicked in. Whereas now there is much more nuanced, broader scope of violations that can be addressed, and many more tools for the integrity regime. Is that a fair assessment?
Well,
that things have improved
not really. I mean, if you would proceed with fraud investigations, then it would have kicked in. So right now you're perhaps in the same boat. You know, if nobody moves on the result of the audit, how can it do its work? So,
okay.
But the added tools are welcome.
And then just to clarify, you mentioned that you had done 100 audits per year. Are those 100 audits of federal programs?
Of the PSIP program, and we also, don't forget, we once the ISC introduced the IBD as their own, we done desk audits for them on the registrants and on people who were already registered to ensure that they had maintained eligibility.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll go to Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Quickly, Mr. Hartle.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Just quickly, Mr. Hartle, I want to come back to the previous question regarding consequences. Were they sufficient, that is, for businesses that claim to be Indigenous when they weren't? You said no. In your humble opinion, what would be an appropriate sanction that could be applied to a business, a non-Indigenous one, that claimed to be Indigenous or that took advantage of an Indigenous business?
Okay, if your fraud investigation by the outside authority like the RCMP convicts them or manages to find them guilty or gather enough evidence, then they should be barred from bidding on federal government contracts.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Now, in the document you brought to us regarding Canada Healthcare Agency, what are the gaps in the procedure that open the doors to what we saw and the abusive process that you highlighted in your report?
In the pre-award audit, they didn't verify the claims by the bidder. Okay, when we started doing the post-award audit, then we discovered that those documents were fraudulent. Okay, so the gap is that maybe the pre-award audit was not extensive enough or was not conducted thoroughly enough.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Blaney, please. 2.5.
Well, thank you, Chair. You know, I just have one follow-up question. You talked about CHCA and some of their practices, and specifically around Pearl Chilton, who was part of the joint venture. And you mentioned that she was left with a large tax bill because of a serious misrepresentation. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that looked like, and again, maybe touch on if Pearl Chilton had any capacity besides the judicial process to advocate for herself.
Okay. No, I wasn't talking about Ms. Chilton when I was talking about the judicial process. Ms. Chilton had avenues to pursue legally, that is, and I think she did. She had an Aboriginal lawyer represent her, and there was some litigation.
No, you didn't. I understand that you didn't mention it, but what I'm trying to understand is for Indigenous people who are part of this process, if something goes poorly, what are the steps that they have to self-advocate? Is it only through the judicial process? As far as you're speaking right now, it seems like the only way they can address it is by getting a lawyer.
Ms. Chilton asked INAC for help. INAC didn't help her. So her advocacy in that manner was out of the question. So all that remains for her at that point was the legal process.
Thank you. I'm done. That's my question.
Thanks. Mr. Genuis for 5, and then finish with Mr. Souza for 5, please.
Thank you, Chair. And frankly, Mr. Hartle, this whole situation is just disgusting. You have a department in government that is supposed to be there to support Indigenous peoples. You have a Prime Minister who said that this is the most important relationship. And then you have really what we've been talking about throughout this whole scandal, which is elite, well-connected, non-Indigenous insiders taking advantage of the program to try to enrich themselves, and Indigenous peoples being left at a severe disadvantage as a result, and the government, the department, not having their back, only trying to preserve the optics of the program. To review your testimony, you identified the fact that there was a problem with the Canadian Healthcare Agency. The minister was likely informed. You wanted to refer this issue to the RCMP. You were blocked in doing so. They subsequently changed the rules to make the auditing process more difficult, and then they fired your auditing company. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. You wanted to follow up on your reaction to Ms. Salton's testimony yesterday.
I think I covered quite a bit of that. You know, that one was stating that it was a joint decision when it was a unilateral decision by Ms. Sultan, and then there was a question about the work, and she said the work changed, which is a total falsehood. You know, like Round Point Consulting dealt with a number of tasks, which were the desk audits of new registrants, the ensuring existing registrants had maintained IBD eligibility, pre-award audits on set-aside contracts, random audits designated by the senior program manager, and large set-aside post-awards audits when they were 70% completed.
In particular, as part of that auditing process, you were looking at indigeneity, whether these companies were actually Indigenous. And the department at some point decided they did not want you looking at indigeneity. Now, a key issue here is misrepresentation of Indigenous identity fraud by companies that are getting government contracts. And they made a policy change to prevent external auditors from looking precisely at whether Indigenous identity fraud is happening. Why do you think they made that change?
I think there was pressure from certain Indigenous groups. And that was one of the things. They were always petitioning the department for, I think what was mentioned in yesterday's meeting that I watched, is that some of these groups want to set up their own directories and have the government access those.
Right. But I suppose having the communities themselves do the work is a different issue. The problem is now nobody's looking at it, right? The government, it seems, exploited this desire to have the Indigenous communities themselves do this work by essentially creating a vacuum in which right now nobody's looking at indigeneity.
He's looking at them right now.
Right.
Not externally, you know.
Right. Okay.
So, and if you don't do an external independent auditor, you'll leave yourself open to bias.
Yeah, totally. So just in the time I have left, Chair, I want to seek the agreement of the committee, and I think it's been distributed. I asked it to be distributed in advance for the following proposal. That the committee invite the following witnesses to appear in relation to potential abuse of Indigenous procurement rules involving Canadian Healthcare Agency. Canadian Healthcare Agency, Sharon Umana, Jessica Salton, and Pearl Chilton. Further, that the committee authorize the chair to summon witnesses who do not agree to appear. So I hope that's been distributed. I'm just seeking the agreement of the committee.
Can I add, like Melanie Reid, who was in charge at that time, the senior program manager, she should maybe be on your list.
Okay, I that's what I meant to say, Chair, as well. In fact, I just misread my own notes here. Yeah. So as I was saying, Canadian Healthcare Agency, Sharon Umana, Jessica Salton, Melanie Reid, and Pearl Chilton. If Melanie Reid's not on the distributed email, I'm sure it's the clerk's fault, not mine. Just joking. A great addition, Mr. Hartle.
Are we fine with the?
We just got it. I haven't even looked at it yet. You say it was previously distributed.
It just came out now.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So no.
Okay. Well,
I haven't even got it on my P9 yet.
Well, it hasn't gone out yet, but do you wish to we can start a speaking list?
okay. Well, let's make it a notice of motion then, Chair, and maybe we'll be able to come back to it
maybe after
later.
The motion is fair.
Okay.
Where we've got to get to the bottom of this issue with Canadian Healthcare Agency clearly, and there may be responses from the various people Mr. Hartle has named, and I would certainly like to hear from them.
Great.
But as I read it, which
Perfect.
is including
Yeah.
Melanie Reid. Thanks.
Perfect. We'll make sure that's updated, and we will come back to it after everyone's had a chance to look at it. Mr. Sousa, finish us off, please. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being with us today. So I'm just trying to understand the circumstances that's before us. You've identified through your many audits that you've done in the past as a subcontract for Altus and then as a subcontract for Round Point.
Subcontractor to Altus and employee for Round
All right,
Point.
so you're an employee of Round Point,
Employee.
which then that contract was terminated over time
Yes.
and wasn't renewed.
It was terminated for convenience.
Fair enough. But the contract came up for renewal and it wasn't renewed?
No, it was terminated. It was terminated before the contract ended.
Okay. And in that process of audits that you've made, you said you found about maybe 8 to 10% noncompliance out of all those audits that you put forward, right?
Don't hold me to that, but I think it's about that amount.
Fair enough. And then when you've done the audit and it was identified that those non-compliant, and it's very clear on the website as to what you have to do to be compliant.
Yes.
And one of the ways that's been used to encourage Indigenous companies to succeed and get into the system and to take advantage of the opportunities that are available to them is through joint partnership, right? Because they, as sole providers, they don't have the wherewithal, possibly at the time. That's why we're nurturing them to be better. And the case here was there was a non-Indigenous company offering services and using an Indigenous partner to provide for greater opportunity. And that partner then didn't fulfill its requirements, and as you've pointed out, there was questionable activities as a result. And so corrective action was taken, and that was suspended, and that contract didn't proceed. Subsequently, the government has taken additional steps to try to provide for compliance and audit and oversight and integrity into the system. The definition of Indigenous or the ingenuity is something that's been also relevant in these discussions as to who should be the one determining that. And you're not the one determining indigenuity.
In my audits, I determined that.
So you are the one who's deciding on behalf of the Indigenous communities, those who are in debate at times as to who's Indigenous and who isn't. They're relying on you to say, yes, you are or you are not Indigenous?
It's not relying on me. There's a published criteria list that you follow. I'm an auditor. I just make sure that if the criteria says that you're Indigenous, you know, I gather the evidence and I state there is ingenuity.
Right, and some of those very communities are saying that shouldn't be up to the government to decide.
Well,
I'm just referencing what has happened in these testimonies.
No, I understand that, but let me tell you that part of the process is we interacted with all these various groups, eh? Like if we wanted to find out if somebody was a Nunavut company, we phoned the registrar, or wrote to the registrar and asked them if this person's on the list. If this person's on the list, they're Indigenous. Okay, so in the same thing, there's various self-government entities that maintain their own lists, and we just, as auditors, we would contact that group and ask them if this person is on their list as a member.
Fair enough. So I'm not questioning the actual audit of that nursing home. I'm trying to look at what's happening beyond that. Okay, we get what happened and it was identified and it's being dealt with. But now beyond that is a greater issue. And the Integrity Commission that's been established, the steps that are being put forward, is to try to provide integrity and transparency in the system while at the same time nurturing the Indigenous engagement for their success.
So what I'm pointing out, those things are already being done, okay? You know, that like the criteria is published by the department, and we have to follow the criteria. If you fall in one of these 6 categories, you're Indigenous. If you don't fall in any of those 6 categories, you're not Indigenous. But as auditors, we also make sure that we've done all the background. Like I've read all the Supreme Court cases.
I'm not getting. That's not my point. My point is, we are all entitled to. We required to that audit, to that job, and I'm trying to understand. So, what should we do better? I mean, we look at the fraud. We have to make sure that doesn't continue. We're taking these extra steps to try to prevent them. So, what are you suggesting should be done?
I just suggest you have your departments follow the practice. You know, I mean, if you take away all the ability to audit, you can do whatever you like. You know,
we're augmenting the audits. We're actually creating greater restraints.
Well, I don't see it in this particular case. I mean, you've removed all the external audits.
Okay, that is our time, gentlemen. Mr. Hurdle, thanks for joining us. You did mention again some reports that I think you submitted to a different committee. If you're able to deliver them to the clerk now or electronically, that'd be wonderful. Colleagues, we're going to suspend briefly and welcome our next witness. We are back. We welcome back another friend of OGGO, Mr. Yeglek. Welcome back. It's good to see you again. If you have an opening statement, the floor is yours. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Je remercie Monsieur le Président et les membres du comité de m'avoir invité.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for inviting me today to discuss an issue central to the integrity of federal procurement oversight, that being the underfunding of my office.
OPPO, Office of the Procurement Ombud, is mandated to ensure fairness, openness, and transparency in federal procurement. However, without the necessary resources, effectively fulfilling this mission has become near impossible, ultimately jeopardizing the trust Canadian taxpayers have in federal procurement. Since the office's creation in 2008, our budget of $4.1 million has essentially remained static. It has not been adjusted to reflect increased costs, nor has it accounted for the growing volume and complexity of the work that we handle. Malgré l'engagement dans les derniers
Despite the commitment in the last federal budget to uphold and enforce the highest standards of federal procurement and ensure sound stewardship of public funds, our budget saw no increase. In fact, there have been approximately $350,000 in reductions to our budget over the years as part of wider government cutbacks.
While I understand the government's need to find efficiencies across many departments, now is a crucial moment to invest in an office that oversees a $37 billion procurement system. Underfunding our office is akin to failing to perform basic maintenance on your vehicle, resulting in a breakdown. My office was built to handle the necessary repairs to keep the vehicle running, but unfortunately we do not have the necessary resources to perform this essential function. With the requested increase to our budget, we wouldn't just perform the routine maintenance necessary to keep the vehicle on the road, but we'd also have the insight and capacity to support selecting the new vehicle. As outlined in my annual report, the time has come. It's time to replace the vehicle. It's time for action now. In recent years, our office has seen an increase in overall cases, contract award complaints, contract administration complaints, requests for mediation services, and ad hoc procurement practice reviews such as We Charity, ArriveCan, McKinsey, Bait and Switch, and just recently a potential review of Indigenous procurement. These are all vital areas of procurement that require analysis, and simply put, we are inadequately funded to properly do this. De plus, le BOA a assumé la charge du travail.
Additionally, OPPO has assumed the workload of the recently dissolved Business Dispute Management Program at PSPC, which also provided a recourse mechanism for suppliers and contract disputes.
I want to share with you how this funding shortfall has impacted my office's ability to effectively deliver on our legislative mandate. And, if left unaddressed, it will continue to have a huge impact on Canadian taxpayers, suppliers, and the federal buying community. To undertake the ad hoc reviews I just mentioned, we had to obtain one-time funding from PSBC, which solved some of the problems but also created new ones. The one-time funding prohibited our office from hiring permanent resources and instead created a patchwork solution where we were forced to hire temporary staff who did not have the experience or time to lead these reviews. We refused to hire consultants to conduct the reviews with the one-time funding for many of the reasons you saw in ArriveCan and McKinsey, as well as the need to avoid conflicts of interest. We need permanent funding that will enable us to hire permanent resources with the skills and experience to lead these important, complex procurement reviews. Other serious impacts of our funding shortfall include delays in launching our procurement practice follow-up reviews, which are crucial for assessing whether departments have implemented our recommendations. There's no point in conducting systemic reviews and making recommendations for improvement if we don't follow up to ensure the actions have been taken to correct the deficiencies. Results from our follow-up reviews are reported publicly and hold the departments and agencies accountable for addressing problems that we've identified in our initial review. It also shows delays in launching our knowledge deepening and sharing research studies, which provide guidance to procurement officials and suppliers and are essential in establishing the reasonable grounds required by legislation to launch our systemic reviews. It also impacts giving us limited ability to conduct outreach activities across Canada to ensure that Canadian businesses we were created to help know we exist and how we can help them, particularly small and medium-sized businesses. It also gives us limited ability to proactively launch procurement practice reviews in important areas such as construction contract administration, defense procurement, Indigenous procurement, and others that would have a significant impact on procurement. We have the potential to proactively conduct reviews and make recommendations that aim to improve federal procurement before costly problems materialize. I will stop there, but the list goes on. Our office has recently put forward our budget request for a third time because the previous two had been declined. We have always acted in a fiscally prudent manner and have requested funds when we knew we no longer had the resources needed to deliver on our services. We took a professional approach to be proactive before the situation became critical, but unfortunately we have now entered that crisis point where difficult decisions will need to be taken and critical services will be cut. In our most recent budget ask,
sorry, I need you to wrap up, sir. You're past your 5 minutes.
Sure. In our most recent budget ask, we are seeking a phased budget increase in the amount of $1 million for 25-26, $3.4 million for 26-27, and an average of $4.7 million annually after that. Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, and again, thanks for joining us today. We'll start with Mrs. Block, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Yiglich, for being with us today. I know you've appeared before this committee on numerous occasions in the last couple of years, and we do appreciate you being available. And we know that this is an issue that you've raised with us. In fact, I'm reminded of a letter that I wrote to you in which I was requesting that you look deeper into the contracting with GC Strategies. And at that time, you had announced that your office was launching a review of the practice of bait and switch across government. In that letter, you also highlighted what you've highlighted here today, which is a lack of resources. In fact, you said, and you may have said part of this here today, and I'm going to quote, "My office has operated within its allocated budget, which has remained static for more than 15 years. While we continue to deliver on our mandate, budget constraints have made it difficult. Insufficient sustainable funding has led to staffing shortages that limit our capacity to conduct ad hoc systemic reviews regarding fairness-related risks brought to the office's attention." And I'll end the quote there. So given that, will you be able to complete your review on the practice of bait and switch with your current funding level?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So bait and switch is one of the ad hoc reviews where we did receive one-time funding. As I did note in my opening statement, it does also create risks associated with the one-time funding because we have to reallocate internal resources. These are high-profile reviews where we need to have ensured experienced leads are the practitioners who are leading these reviews. Therefore, with the one-time funding, we are prohibited from hiring full-time staff. It has to be temporary. As I mentioned, it's essentially a decision that I've taken that we will not hire consultants to perform these reviews for many reasons, one of which being conflicts of interest, but there are many other reasons as well. So we do have the resources, and that review has been launched.
Thank you. It was reported by Blacklock's on November 27, 2024, in an article with the headline, "25 Billion Contract System Broken." And I'll quote it, "Federal contracting is near the bottom tier in accountability and fairness," Procurement Ombudsman Alexander Ziglich said yesterday. Ziglich told the Senate National Finance Committee that irregularities like sweetheart contracting were symptomatic of a broken system. I guess one could never have imagined what we were going to discover over the last 2 years in procurement, and you listed just a number of them in your opening statement. Can you tell me two things? The first is, how many ongoing reviews is your office undertaking currently? And what do you see needs to happen in order to fix this broken system, as you called it?
So Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I'll briefly go over the statistics, but just in procurement-related cases that we see, and I use the statistics from 17-18, which is when I started in the role, to current. So we went from 264 cases to 582 cases. That's a 120% increase. Written complaints, we went from 26 written complaints to 62, also 138% increase. We have 102 written complaints received so far this year. PPRs, which are the procurement practice reviews, such as McKinsey. We've conducted 41 since our office opened in 2008, but we've actually done 20 in the last 5 years, so a significant increase. The procurement practice review follow-ups, which unfortunately have been captured in this financial crunches, we want to launch them within 2 years of completing the initial review. We've not been able to meet that time frame, so therefore accountability is lacking. For reviews of complaint reviews, again, we went from 4 to 38 this year. Now, 38 is a bit of an anomaly. That is certainly well above what we normally would see, but again, 4 in 2017-18 to 38 this year. And ADR, so alternative dispute resolution requests, we went from 9 to 11. So increase in all areas. To answer your second question about fundamental issues, so this is an area that I'm extremely passionate about because I think I've been in the job long enough where I've been able to see a significant trend, and the trend is troubling. So I think rather than formulate Band-Aid solutions, it's time to call for transformational changes. That's essentially what we've done in our annual report. But it's not enough to just call for transformational changes. We actually have formulated what we believe are some seminal changes. In addition, in anticipation of kind of our annual report being tabled, we also wanted to consult broadly. So we identified 10 experts, including a broad section of the buying community within the federal government, and asked them what are the top 5 foundational changes that they believe are necessary. But we provided them our 5, so if you'll allow me to read our 5, they shouldn't surprise you. Okay, I'll do it very quickly. The first one is establish a chief procurement officer position, something that I've mentioned a number of times. It's to make sure there's accountability in federal procurement. Second is create a government-wide vendor performance management system. I think it will really address many of the issues that we're hearing about even today. Number 3 is develop one universally applicable set of procurement rules. There are too many rules. People just don't know what set of rules to follow. Number 4, establish a framework for data collection to increase transparency of federal procurement. Again, data collection has been incredibly problematic. And number 5, make use of artificial intelligence advancements to modernize federal procurement tools and systems. Those are the 5 we've put forward, but we are consulting. I'd be happy to return to the committee to give you the results of our consultations, and we have a plan as to how to implement these into solutions.
Perfect. Thank you. Go to Mr. Baines. When would you have that, you mentioned after the consultation period, when would that be?
We're actually currently undergoing the consultation. So our hope is we have a deadline of December 31st to have completed the consultations. We'll amalgamate the information. The next stage of the process is to convert these into a knowledge deepening and sharing piece, which will provide context and background on each one and an implementation plan on how these can actually be successfully implemented within the system.
Perfect. Mr. Baines, sir, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Jeglich, for joining us once again and sharing the important work that you do with us. So I'd like to know a little bit about, you talked about certain officer positions you'd like to fill. Can you maybe share how many full-time equivalents you would need to adequately fulfill the mandate you just shared with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our most recent funding request, so currently we have 31 full-time employees, 23 of which are indeterminate, meaning that 8 are casual or part-time. Our funding request puts forward 27 new FTE positions over the 3 years in a phased approach. So $1 million spend next fiscal year, so 25-26, $3.4 million in 26-27, and $4.7 million in 27-28. Those 27 positions would actually make permanent the 8 existing, so it's 23 plus 27. So 9 of those positions would be specifically dedicated to procurement practice reviews. 3 of them would be for reviews of complaints. 7 would be for alternative dispute resolution. 3 for knowledge deepening and sharing, and 5 for outreach.
Okay, and then is there any way to that we have internal, some of the people that may be on part-time could be trained to do those roles, or is it that you need to fulfill these from outside? And I understand you talked about not having consultants. Maybe share a little bit like what the risk is there with the conflict of interest there as well.
So I'll explain the conflict of interest first. So if you have an outside body retained to do reviews of procurement files, ultimately they are looking at commercially confidential information provided by suppliers. Suppliers, when they participate in a process, may have signed on to an audit right. However, there isn't necessarily an understanding that those audit rights would extend to third parties, specifically within our office. So therefore, that creates a conflict of interest. From a timing perspective, these systemic reviews are long-term reviews. They take 1 year to complete. So I think the nightmare scenario for us is to have resources, who are temporary in nature, complete a third or half of the work, and then ultimately are pulled elsewhere by a full-time opportunity. And then we have to replace someone midway through a long-term process. It's not as lengthy on reviews of complaints. On reviews of complaints, it's 120 working days, but nonetheless, these are long-term projects, and it is a real risk where we lose resources. And if I may, I'll just highlight in 1 year, 2 years ago, we lost 8 resources within 1 fiscal year. Now, that may not seem significant, but these were 8 full-time employees. So when you have 23, losing 8 is very significant. So it really strained our office, and I would suggest harmed us in future years to be able to deliver successfully.
Yeah, I noted in some information that I had here, it actually stated that there were 35 plus 12. So I understand that must have been the 8 that are missing or that have left the positions. On the you also talked a little bit about that the complexity of the cases have changed in the past few years, and maybe explain why you feel that the caseload may be increasing. Is there a trend you're seeing that may continue, or with the work that you're doing now and recommendations that are put forward, will we be able to reduce the risk or the complaints?
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. The complexity continues to increase, partly also for good reasons. The work of this committee, as an example, you pass motions requesting our office to look into specific subjects. As a result, we take those motions very seriously. Our legislation requires us to establish reasonable grounds prior to launching a review, but we do use the motion from the committee as an initial substantiation of reasonable grounds, and then we have to validate that substantiation by doing background research. So there are cases, again, that have been brought to us by outside sources that hadn't traditionally been the case, such as members of parliament, parliamentary committees, the minister herself at the time. Those were new areas where we were brought procurement-related issues and asked to do investigations, which had the scrutiny of delivering the results before a parliamentary committee.
Can you maybe expand on the ministers of bringing something forward, maybe an example of where that was born out of?
Thank you for the question. So the McKinsey review was actually a specific request from the minister.
And so you talked a little bit about the one-time funding allocations. It's not sufficient. You know that this work's going to continue. So I'm not sure if I heard when I was talking about, is there an opportunity to put in enough measures based on the recommendations? And I know you have the report coming at the end of the month. Will we be able to, at some point, have some measures that are in there that further we see reductions in some of the complaints eventually? Is there something that you have an idea of how you think you can get that done?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So I'll answer it as honestly as possible. I think we're nowhere near that point. I think we will continue to see an increase in the number of complaints, primarily because I think our office has still not a well-known standing within the procurement community. So the more people that learn about our office's services, the more people use our services. And in many ways, that's a good thing. And we are seeing positive outcomes. I don't want the message from me to be doom and gloom only. There are certainly aspects of
Sorry, that is our time. We're trying to get you out of here at a decent hour. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yeglage, when I look at the 2024-2025 budget, I can see that the procurement ombudsman, in terms of activities, has a 4,485,000 and so on. I see no increases in supplementary estimates A or B. And with that, you are being told that you have to manage your whole team, fund your whole team, and increasing demand. And that's the same budget you've had over the same past 15 years.
Plus the one-time funding. So we do receive one-time funding for the ad hoc reviews. So we receive $250,000 for McKinsey, $250,000 for ArriveCan, and $300,000 for Bait and Switch.
Lorsque
All right. So we also get all kinds of documents, for example, from McKinsey and ArriveCan. Now, still haven't finished going through all of them because there are tens of thousands of pages to go through. I'm alone. You have a team. But I know that even with a team, that takes a lot of time because it's one thing to just read through them, but it's another thing to really compare them, to analyze them, and to see, you know, that's a duplicate, that we're going to keep that, we don't need this, this is required for the analysis, and so on. You said you got $250,000 for McKinsey. And what is that, $1 per page, $1.50 per page or so, maximum? Is that enough to pay your teams for the amount of time you have?
So this gives me the opportunity to speak about the team that we have. We have an excellent team, and I'm incredibly proud of the work that we do. I think if I didn't have such a strong team, I wouldn't be able to answer the question as confidently, but we were able to do the review within the allocated budget. One thing we're trying to do very diligently is ensure that we're spending taxpayer dollars as carefully as possible. So whenever we receive monies, we don't spend in ways that are unnecessary. So that being said, certainly we would benefit from a larger review team because it puts an inordinate amount of pressure on individuals. And again, what we could see happen is if one of those individuals should leave, again, that creates an enormous pressure on the organization because there aren't many resources that are capable of doing these reviews. So I'll answer your question, yes, but with some caveats.
et je constate que
What I'm seeing also is that $4,485,462 over the past 15 years, when a number of budgets have been doubled during the same period. Well, is that what you need, really? Is a doubling of your budget to allow you to do your work properly and to respond to the demand that you're seeing?
So essentially over the 3-year term, that is essentially what we're asking for, but it has to be staged. As a small organization, we can't dedicate all our time to human resource actions either. So doubling the organization takes time, and we have to do it strategically. So I think we've asked for a $1 million increase for the next financial year, 3.4, and then 4.7, which would essentially be a doubling of our annual budget in 3 years' time.
merci beaucoup. Et
Thank you very much. And this budget you're asking for, you want it to remain in the future. You want it to be the basic funding in future.
OK, excellent.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. Now, people may not realize the role of the ombudsman in terms of procurement, how important it is to ensure that procedures are followed. Could you give us some additional details to really explain to those who are watching the importance of a procurement ombudsman and also the guardrails that you really provide against fraud, against the lack of respect of procedures and so on?
So thank you for the confidence in explaining the importance of the role of the federal ombud. Again, there's only one. I have the authority to do 3 main things. One is systemic reviews that are recommendations across over 90 departments and agencies to improve procurement practices where we see reasonable grounds. Second is reviewing complaints from Canadian suppliers about the award or administration of federal contracts. Again, that makes us different from the Canadian International Trade Tribunal, who can only look at complaints associated with awards that are covered by free trade agreements. And finally, we can offer alternative dispute resolution, dispute resolution services for Canadian suppliers who successfully win federal government contracts and experience issues. And this is something that we see has been historically underutilized, but we're seeing more and more acceptances from departments, and that's where I see optimism, because we are seeing departments with the goal of resolving these disputes successfully, and it's happening, right? And that's an efficiency that saves taxpayer dollars, because it's not going to litigation, it's not costing millions of dollars, and our mediation services typically only take 1 day. So if you have the right people in the room, then absolutely we get resolution and we get results. What we've also done is we see the importance of professionalizing the community. That's why we share knowledge across the community broadly with our knowledge deepening and sharing pieces, and we've committed significant energy to diversifying the federal supply chain. I think I've said a number of times, one of the shocking statistics we've come up with is over the course of my tenure, we have analyzed the data and seen that in many instances of competitive procurements, only 32% of them result in more than one competitive bid. Right? So you have one bidder. So I see part of my role is making the system work better, because you're not benefiting from diverse solutions. You're not benefiting from pricing competition, and that's inefficient. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Blaney, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I thank you very much for being here with us today. I think the first question that I want to start off with, and just maybe a statement, is just how much I appreciate what you're sharing. You're making this so clear and accessible about how this works, and that is not always the case, so I just want to appreciate that. I do want to know a little bit more about the alternative dispute resolution. You talked about it at the end of the past question, but I'm just wondering, can you give us maybe not a specific example, but an example of what you're actually dealing with? And you said sometimes it can be as quick as 1 day. So is there a common issue that can be resolved fairly quickly that you could point out to the committee?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So oftentimes these disputes, because it's in the administration phase, revolves around payment or non-payment for performance of goods, services. Sometimes the question is conformity of goods, whether the goods provided meet the specifications. An example I can give you is a good one where I just want to say on our ADR services, the dollar value can be $5,000, it can be $500 million, and it's an important distinction. So I know sometimes people equate the services we provide with low dollar value contracts. That's not the case with our ADR services. One of the cases, we saw a communication breakdown in a large $50 million plus construction contract, and these parties had a long-term relationship but stopped communicating with one another, and there was a needed communication happening. So our intervention in that situation was simply to reestablish communications that were legally required by the contract that were not happening. And so the parties would just, fail to perform certain obligations because they were just so upset with one another. So one of the initial steps was just reestablishing communications, and they both lived in a relatively small community, and so they would see one another regularly. So you can imagine this friction point was causing them significant heartache, both professionally and I imagine personally as well. So our intervention there was to reestablish the communications, and though there was no monetary component of that mediation, it then put them on solid footing to continue their relationship.
And I would assume that if it continued, it would have been something that would impact the financial process for sure.
Mr. Chair, absolutely.
Okay. So I know that we've been talking a lot about Indigenous procurement, and I'm just wondering, with these services that you have, and I know you have 5 pillars, how does that relate to the Indigenous community, and what kind of work do you do there? Today we had a testimony earlier, and it felt like the only way that Indigenous people could actually get sort of clarity or justice was through the judicial process. So I'm just wondering, how could you be helpful in this, and what are you doing currently?
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So that is a point of contention within our office. I'll try to break it down by service, but for Indigenous suppliers who have been awarded a contract pursuant to the PSIB, if there's another Indigenous supplier who wishes to complain, they cannot complain to our office because we derive our mandate as a result of the CFTA, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Because the PSIB is an exception to the application of the CFTA, we do not have jurisdiction to review complaints from Indigenous suppliers for contracts awarded pursuant to the PSIB. And that's also true for the Canadian International Trade Tribunal. So both the Trade Tribunal and ourselves have flagged this issue. We also understand, both from testimony and our own consultations, that there is a desire to have an Indigenous-led solution and dispute resolution mechanism, and we also agree with that. However, we think that all suppliers should be put on the same footing. So make them eligible to participate in our dispute resolution, our reviews of complaints. We can, however, offer dispute resolution services to Indigenous suppliers. So if an Indigenous supplier has an issue under a federal contract, they can, in fact, seek our ADR services. So that is a distinction. But on the first one, that has been a call to action that I've highlighted in our annual report 3 times, that this change is necessary, and I think it needs to happen.
So just to help me understand, so these organizations can't go to you on these particular issues. So what's the alternative for them? Do they have an alternative at this point?
Mr. Chair, so to give you a bit of historic context, so when the PSIB was originally known as PSAB, there was documentation that seemed to indicate that a dispute resolution mechanism would be stood up at some point. However, until such time that departments were to determine their own dispute resolution mechanisms within their respective departments. A dispute resolution mechanism was never stood up, and we were prevented from having jurisdiction based on how our mandate is structured. And like I said, it's created a bit of a difficulty when an Indigenous supplier comes to us with a complaint. And so we do have statistics. So from 2019 to date, we had 40 Indigenous suppliers come to us. 11 were specific to PSIB, and 4 of them filed written complaints that we could not look into because we lacked jurisdiction.
And there's no alternative.
So the alternative, I believe, as highlighted in the previous testimony, is the court system.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Mrs. Kusi, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Yeglick, for returning to Government Operations Committee. The President of the Treasury Board came to committee last week and claimed that the new Treasury Board Manager's Guide for Procurement was fixing many problems with the federal procurement process. In your opening statement, you had 5 recommendations. Is there any interest from the President of the Treasury Board or the Minister of Procurement in these 5 recommendations? Have they indicated to you they are reviewing these recommendations and taking steps to implement them?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So to be fair, 2 of the 5 we've been fully transparent with. They're in our annual report, and we've highlighted them. I've spoken to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada about those foundational changes. The other 3 I've highlighted in my testimony today, but we have not finalized our work, so I can't say those are the definitive 5 that we will put forward at the end of the work, but those were the 5 we went out to the experts with. We will engage in consultations upon conclusion of our work, and I can't speak to the likelihood of implementation by ministers.
You mentioned in your opening statement the necessity to stop having Band-Aid solutions and have real change. Are you sensing an appetite from either the President of the Treasury Board or the Minister of Procurement for real change and to bring an end to these Band-Aid solutions?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I think for those who have worked within the system, and I apologize because I've said this at this committee before, but if you look back at historic reviews and audits going back decades, you could change the date on them and they would still be relevant. So that tells me that the existing framework and the recommendations that were made throughout the following 2 decades, have not been sufficient to rectify long-standing issues. So I think we're at the point now when we need to recognize that broader solutions are necessary, so outside of the box thinking, which is why we've taken the approach of saying the analogy, a new car is needed, because this car is asked to do many things, but primarily bring us from point A to point B, and I'm not sure that it's doing that anymore. And given the transactional volume per year, $37 billion, we need a vehicle that's going to work. And it almost doesn't matter who you talk to within the federal procurement system. If they're being honest with you, they will tell you that it's not working.
So then, would you say that this government has taken significant steps to reform the procurement process, or have they simply written new guides and directives with additional rules, or a simplified version of the existing rules?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think, to be honest, all of the above. They have taken steps to simplify the process. They have taken steps, particularly during COVID. I think there was a unique opportunity to work closely with provincial and municipal entities to engage in bulk buying. And I think that created some economic synergies across procurement that I had hoped that would continue beyond the COVID dynamic. There's still work ongoing in that area, and documentation is made available to provincial colleagues so that they can use federal templates. I know there has been significant work on simplification. However, again, the work that's been done is insufficient, and it's not to comment on the intention, but if you pick up a solicitation document, and like I would suggest, I'm a lawyer and I've been in this space for over 20 years. And I find it incredibly cumbersome and difficult sometimes to understand what I'm being asked to look at or do. And I'm someone who should know. And so imagine if you're a small and medium-sized business. The one thing I will say is the inclusion of Procurement Assistance Canada is a significant step in the right direction. They essentially provide the opportunity to work one-on-one with small and medium-sized suppliers and help guide them through the process. But that in and of itself is not simplification. That's an acknowledgement that the system is too complex and you need this additional measure to guide them. But the answer is fix the system.
Well, I think that the term COVID environment is a very gracious depiction of panic and reaction. Thank you for your time here, Mr. Yeglick. Thank you, Chair.
Point of order, Chair.
Thanks.
If I can just flag that a revised version of the motion has been sent by email and put on notice, I just wanted to make sure people were aware. And
Perfect. Thanks very much. Mr. Jouari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and once again, welcome, Mr. Yeglick. It's good to have you in our committee. I had an opportunity to read the report. In your recent annual report, you referred to the need for a change to your mandate. And I think in response to Madam Bloch, probably that's the area that you kind of tangentially were passing on. Can you explain what changes to the mandate of your office is being considered right now?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So the changes that we've requested, those are kind of long-standing that go back 3 or 4 years, and those were the regulatory changes. And I guess the way I answered the question was also with the foundational changes that we've seen necessary that are much more broad than the ones that I'll describe to you. One of them is giving us the authority to review complaints from Indigenous suppliers on contracts awarded pursuant to the PSIB. The second is the right to compel documentation. So that has been something with this committee has offered kindly to help with. If we're seeing issues where documentation is not provided by departments or agencies pursuant to our reviews, that we could engage this committee. But the marker I'll put down is I still have more rights as a Canadian citizen making an access to information request than I do as the procurement ombudsman requesting documentation. And then the final one is changing the opportunity to award damages So I can make a recommendation for lost profit, or I can make a recommendation for bid costs associated with complaints. Currently, that's capped at 10%. We've heard that that is an artificial restriction on some people bringing forward complaints because, again, these are busy businesses, so if they don't see it worth their while financially to bring a complaint forward where there is merit, then they're not going to bring the complaints. So we're seeking that ceiling to be increased to 25% from the existing 10%. That being said, documentation has to be provided in order to validate. So it's not just a simple 10 to 25% jump. It would be upon validation of actual lost profits or upon validation of actual bid costs.
Great. I mean, those are the points that we could use in our study. What impact does these new mandate has on the budget and on your FTE equivalent?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So by making those changes, it would obviously increase A, complaints, and B, it would also increase the eligibility of additional complainants on the Indigenous side. On the compelling documentation, that should have no impacts on the FTEs or costing. It's just access to documentation.
Okay, thank you. Next question, it has to do with really with the compliance, and sorry, with the independence. And I'm referring you to Section 11 of your report, page 33, Parliamentary Authority. And I quote, the funding approved by the Treasury Board for the operation of the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman, part of the Public Works and Government Service Canada appropriation, and consequently, the office is subject to the legislative, regulatory, and policy framework that governs PWGSC. Nonetheless, implicit in the nature and purpose of the OPO is the need for its fulfillment, its mandate in an independent fashion, and can be seen to do so by maintaining an arm's length relationship with PWGSC and the other federal department. What is the issue here?
So from an independence standpoint, if you're talking about, and I just want to make sure I'm answering your question properly, when it comes to one-time funding, what is my concern around independence? There's something called the Venice Principles, and those are the governing principles for the operation of ombuds offices. One of the principles, which is number 21, speaks to sufficient and independent budgetary resources shall be secured. And so currently, independent is the challenge of the resources, because if I'm asked to do a review that I don't have currently budget for, I need to go to the minister and ask for those financial resources. It gives the minister a decision point, perhaps, that I would argue impedes our independence, because if he should determine no resources will be provided, but we have determined that reasonable grounds exist to launch the review, it's a bit of an awkward situation. Now, the statute indicates that we must launch a review, but I do not have the resources to do so, and it puts the minister in an awkward position as well.
I've got 5 seconds, which I yield back to the chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much for those 5 seconds. Mrs. Vignola for 2.5, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yeglich, could you tell us about the increasing demand regarding the Indigenous issue and needs? Also, you talked, I mean, everything you're saying is very interesting. I mean, it's like music to my ears. And that the main message was fixing the system when it's not working, when you have to go one-on-one with a contractor to explain the procedure and hold their hand. That means it's not working. What would you suggest to lighten the process while making sure there are no gaps? You know, that so that there will be no chance for fraud.
Mr. Chair, one of the things I'll compliment the committee. I think the accountability that the committee is bringing along the supplier community is incredibly important. because the work that I do looks at the practices of departments, less so on the practices of suppliers. So I do find the work that the committee is doing in terms of holding suppliers accountable for inappropriate practices is particularly helpful, and I guarantee you it will have positive outcomes in the procurement system moving forward. In terms of what I can suggest as foundational changes, and I'll never stop talking about this until it happens, is the government-wide vendor performance management framework. And its implications are so significant because it's such a basic principle, but the government of Canada should only work with good performing suppliers and should not work with poor performing suppliers. And everyone would agree with that principle. So we have to stand up not just a department-wide system, but a federal system across all departments and agencies. So to complement the Department, like Public Services and Procurement Canada is currently running a pilot within the department, but that's still at the departmental level. That's one other thing I'll highlight is, we would like to perform ADR work for appeals pursuant to the vendor performance management framework. So we need to stand up that capability. And again, where are we going to find those resources, both financial and human, in order to do that? So we believe we're the right entity to do it, but we need the resources. So that will need to be stood up in the next year or two. So time is of the essence. I think we'll also...
Speaking of time, that is ours. Ms. Blaney, please.
All right, well, I'm going to ask you two questions at once so that I can give you as much time to respond as possible. You talked about, first of all, love how you've outlaid the increases so that you actually have time to catch up to yourself enough to do it well. I think that's a really great and honest way of doing it. So you did talk about having the one-time funding and that you wanted to hire permanently, and that if you have people switching it up all the time, and if it is a temporary position, quite frankly, that's just what happens as they move towards a permanent position. So what does that mean for your expertise development and actually doing the job as proficiently as possible? And you also talked about not having enough resources to do those follow-up reviews, which I think are really important. If you look at some of the situations that we're looking at right now in this committee, it's because there wasn't that process done so that we could have ongoing accountability until it all becomes a huge mess and a crisis. So I'm just wondering if you could address those two issues in the conjunction of your increase ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on the second question first, it would pain me to stop doing the follow-up reviews because you use the word accountability, and that's really what the follow-up reviews bring. Now, the challenge is there's nothing mandatory in my legislation that requires me to do the follow-ups. However, I am required to review complaints. I am required to do systemic reviews when reasonable grounds exist, and I do have to offer ADR services. So unfortunately, in the prioritization, that would be one of the first things to go. And for someone who speaks about accountability, it would be incredibly awkward for me to be able to come before the committee and not be able to speak with confidence and say recommendations have or have not been successfully implemented. And that's what the follow-up reviews are meant to do. So that's the second part of your question. The first part is about training and resources and the shifting of the part-time or temporary resources. Training is a significant part of our office, and everyone, sees that as a necessary component of their time at our office. We want to see them grow within our office. We see there's an increased sophistication of work, and they are excited by that as well. So they fully buy into the training component. We hadn't experienced significant turnover until such time that the workload became onerous, and then it became a work-life balance issue. And so even though people really enjoy the work, there are other places that they can also enjoy the work and have a better work-life balance. But training obviously is important. The world of procurement is constantly changing, and so we need to be able to stay current with the issues. And
Thank you, sir. I apologize, but we're out of time. Ms. Kusi, go ahead, please.
Sure, thank you very much. I will actually, Mr. Chair, pass my time over to Mr. Genuis. Thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and Ms. Kusi for her generosity here. Could you just update us on your work on Indigenous procurement in general, and also timelines for that? When are we going to be able to hear back from you on it in general?
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So the motion was passed in September. However, and I hate to answer it this way, but we have not yet secured funding to launch a procurement practice review on Indigenous. We have been tracking, obviously, the developments within the committee. We have been doing background research. We have not yet established reasonable grounds. So there's two components that will still need to happen before we could officially announce any action, which is we would need to establish reasonable grounds, A, and we need to secure funding, B, and neither of those has been completed as of yet.
Okay, help me understand the reasonable grounds piece. I mean, I think there's been so much explosive that's come out of this this discussion, including the resignation of a cabinet minister. What is it sort of in process, or are there other things you need to see in order to demonstrate reasonable grounds?
Mr. Chair, so we also understand that the Auditor General is looking at Indigenous procurement, and as we'd seen in both McKinsey and ArriveCan, we both did complementary reviews. So part of the process is to identify what lines of inquiry the Auditor General will be looking at, because we have 4 that we're currently looking at, and we want to make sure that we offer insights in areas that are not duplicative to what the OAG is going to perform.
Okay, do you have any prospective sense of when that process can be completed, and how can we help you ensure the funding is secured?
So from the funding perspective, obviously my preference is to have the funding request accepted to enable us to stop asking for one-time funding, because it just brings us back to all of the issues that we've seen. But if that's not happening, then we have to revert back to the one-time funding. So there is a meeting scheduled between myself and the CFO, I believe the 17th of December, at which point I'm going to raise the funding question for Indigenous procurement. So I'd happily report back on the outcome of that meeting.
Okay, if it goes well, I mean, are we talking about getting a report by spring, by fall of next year? Or?
So, Mr. Chair, the reports typically are 1 year in duration.
Okay.
So
right, thanks. Just to make sure we don't run out of time, I want to move my motion now with one further change following discussion that will hopefully make this go very smoothly, that the committee invite the following witnesses to appear in relation to potential abuse of the Indigenous procurement rules involving Canadian Healthcare Agency. Canadian Healthcare Agency, Sharon Uma, Jessica Salton, Melanie Reid, Gary Hartle, and Pearl Chilton. Further, that the committee authorize the chair to summon representatives of the Canadian Healthcare Agency if they do not agree to appear.
Okay. Ms. Blaney?
Yeah.
I have no problem with that. I wouldn't mind doing a friendly amendment and add at the end, and that the committee hear from these witnesses in a meeting scheduled during the regular sitting hours of the House of Commons. So I will forward that in and am open to discussion.
I think I see agreement for that for when the House resumes. We'll do that. So be it. You've got about 30 seconds left, Mr. General.
Okay. Well, thank you again for your work. I mean, just in the time I have left, the issue of referral to the RCMP. We heard earlier that Mr. Hartle identified some issues. He wanted these things referred to the RCMP. That didn't happen. What can you tell us about issues where there's criminality involved in procurement, when there should be a referral to the RCMP, and how that should be managed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So from our perspective, the moment we would see an issue of criminality, it would be referred to the RCMP. To date, the only conversations we've had with the RCMP are in relation to the ArriveCan review.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Kuzmierczak, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Mr. Yeglich, for being here today and always for bringing insightful testimony for the work of this committee. You mentioned that your caseload is increasing. It's also increasing in complexity. What's driving that increase as you see it?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I think predominantly awareness of the existence of our office and the services that we provide, partly due to the enhanced spotlight given to the office by our reviews on ArriveCan and McKinsey, but also sustained outreach where we do town hall meetings, and I'll actually be jumping on a town hall meeting at 1 o'clock today, or I guess I'm already 6 minutes late for my town hall with Atlantic Canada. But part of that outreach is making sure that federal suppliers are aware of our services, and equally we speak to federal departments, making them aware of how they could use our services. And I think that's incredibly important for them to understand as well, is that our goal is to make the federal system work better for everyone, and that includes departments, and we're a resource for them as well. So we do departmental meetings. Again, I just did one last week. These are opportunities to speak directly to buyers and hear the issues that they're experiencing firsthand. So they can also bring issues to our attention that could give rise to a systemic review or that could give rise to a dispute resolution mediation process.
You do a lot of community outreach. I noticed you're on social media. The office is on social media. You do town halls across Canada. You came to Windsor, I think, 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And so I just wanted to ask you, what portion of that budget is dedicated towards community outreach and awareness, as you said? Because definitely awareness has been building for this office, for the OPO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So unfortunately, a very small portion. So we try to be as creative as possible and cost effective. So as you mentioned, social media is an avenue we use. We also do outreach by way of town hall, many of which are virtual. But we do find the interactions to be a little more authentic when in person and give a different appreciation for the issues that suppliers are feeling when you actually go to their location. We don't have a significant budget for that travel component, but we do have a national mandate which requires us to serve suppliers across Canada. So I know I didn't directly answer your question, but we can submit in writing how much we actually spend on outreach with specificity in writing.
Yeah, that would be great. Because I know you do a lot more than just analysis and reports. Like I said, outreach is important to the office. How would you measure ROI, the return on investment for Canadians? And so, if you were at a town hall with residents there, how would you explain to them what is the return on investment for the office of the Procurement Ombudsman?
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So specifically on complaints, I guess the ROI is based on the statute and the regulation. So the return on investment is to ensure fairness for them, and it can be by way of compensation. For mediation, it's also an expedient and cost-effective alternative to litigation. So there's a significant ROI there. While I can't quantify, I can certainly say those who have participated in litigation will extol the virtues of a one-day mediation process that leads to a mutual consensus resolution of the issues. Though the ROI that's harder to quantify is on the systemic reviews where we make recommendations to departments. But again, the point there is we're talking about $37 billion of transactions. So whether the recommendations are around transparency or efficiency, again, the goals are always to make the process more efficient, simplify the process. So while I can't quantify the ROI specific to procurement practice reviews, I would say it is substantial.
Has there ever been an attempt to study or assess sort of an ROI of the work of the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman? Just curious.
Mr. Chair, it's a fair question. It's a question I've asked within the last year to help further support our request for financial resources to be able to demonstrate the cost efficiency associated with the work that we do. We have not yet undertaken that work, and as you can imagine, again, that takes resources and or money to undertake that review, and that's, again, unfortunately, the difficulty we're having. Even to put forward the financial ask itself is a laborious process that's taking resources away from doing the analysis, the outreach, etc. So, we are very committed. I think if you ask the department about the professional nature of the proposals we put forward, we do take them very seriously. We want to be very rigorous. But in terms of quantification from a monetary standpoint, that is not something we have done yet.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Mr. Yeglick, I appreciate you bidding with us again. You've shown, as always, why I consider you a friend of this committee, and I hope we can do everything possible to support you, perhaps with the committee's approval. Once you're done that study we spoke about earlier, we can have you back to discuss it. Colleagues, I'm going to suspend for about 30 seconds. We have a hard cap in about 3 minutes. I think we'll go on committee, or we'll go on camera. I only need about 30 seconds of feedback from everyone on an issue. Mr. Yeglick, again, thank you very much. We're suspended.
Thank you.